Week 4 of the fantasy football season. Here's the top 36 running backs I'm ranking this week. Number 1, Christian McCaffrey of the San Francisco 49ers. So McCaffrey, I said it coming into the year, as long as he's healthy, he's going to be a top 1 to 3 option at the running back position. So he's putting up numbers even with Brock Purdy out last week. Had a nice game with Mac Jones, and this week in a good matchup versus Jacksonville. He's my number 1 back. Number 2, James Cook of the Buffalo Bills. James Cook picked up where he left off last season, leading the league in rushing touchdowns. This week, a great matchup versus New Orleans Saints team that can't stop anyone. And most likely, second half of this game is going to be up to a big lead, and that's where a lot of carries most likely we're going to see James Cook get and run the clock out. So with a great matchup, and he's off to a monster start this season. James Cook's in for another big game. Number 3, Bijan Robinson of the Atlanta Falcons. Bijan Robinson, it's been a solid year once again for him the first 3 weeks of the season. Even though his quarterback, Michael Penix, can't do anything offensively, Bijan's still going out there. He's still putting up numbers. One of the better receiving backs out of the backfield. And this week versus a Commander defense, which I know it's definitely improved and has played okay so far in the early going. I think Bijan, he's a matchup-proof running back, obviously, and he goes out there once again and puts up his points. Number 4, Jahmyr Gibbs of the Detroit Lions. Gibbs, a tougher matchup this week versus the Cleveland Browns. But last week I thought it was a tough matchup at the Baltimore Ravens and went out there with 26.5 fantasy points in PPR league. So we know he's got the home run ability, one of the better receiving backs out of the backfield. And this Lion offense is a well-oiled machine. And Gibbs every week is going to be a top 5 option at the position. Number 5, Jonathan Taylor of the Indianapolis Colts. So Jonathan Taylor, way better start to this season than last. Obviously, this offense is way better with Daniel Jones at quarterback than Anthony Richardson. Pretty much besides Tyler Warren, all the same players are back with this Indianapolis Colts team, and they're putting up a lot of points, and they're 3-0 this season. And arguably, though, this week the toughest test yet for them going to Los Angeles. But Jonathan Taylor, he's getting a healthy workload, and he's getting his touchdowns. Where last week at Tennessee, he had 3 of them. Number 6, Saquon Barkley of the Philadelphia Eagles. So maybe Barkley, he's dropping down a little bit in my rankings and consensus, but Saquon still putting up numbers, no doubt about it, but just not the elite numbers like he was last season. And obviously he's not going to duplicate another 2,000-yard season, I wouldn't believe, to Saquon Barkley. So teams, they're zeroing in on stopping Saquon is the early game plan early this season. And this week at Tampa, I expect a high-scoring track meet between these two teams. So I think Barkley, even though he's off to a little bit of a slow start, he's still getting his 15, 18 fantasy points per week. Number 7, Devon Achane of the Miami Dolphins. Achane, 3 games this season, 15 or more fantasy points in PPR leagues. One of the best receiving backs in all fantasy football and pro football is Devon Achane. And we know he gets a lot of these short little bubble screens, and it's a lot of scamming routes as well for Devon Achane, where we see a lot of 3-yard catches, 4-yard catches from him. And this week versus the New York Jets, a defense that can't stop anyone. Now one of their better players, he's on injured reserve, is William Gardner. He hasn't looked good. So this Jet defense, first 3 weeks of the year, can't stop anyone. And once again, I think Devon Achane and this Miami Dolphin offense puts points on the board. Number 8, Josh Jacobs of the Green Bay Packers. So last week he was bottled up by this Cleveland Brown defense, but this week a cupcake matchup at the Dallas Cowboys that can't stop anyone. It doesn't matter if you're a running back or receiver. If you got a Green Bay Packer this week, you pretty much put most of those guys in the lineup with Jacobs, obviously, Jordan Love, Tucker Kraft, and Matthew Golden, because I think this Dallas Cowboy defense is possibly the worst unit in all pro football. We saw last week Caleb go out there, put up a big game. We saw Russell Wilson in week 2 put up a big game, and he's already benched for the rookie Jackson Dart. So like I said, this defense can't stop anyone, and I think Jacobs, he's in for a big game this week after a bad one last. Number 9, Derrick Henry of the Baltimore Ravens. So far it's been a slow start for Henry. Week 1 he went bananas, obviously, at the Buffalo Bills. And then the last 2 weeks, it's been pedestrian type of games, especially in week 2 versus the Browns. 11 carries, 23 yards. And then last week, if he didn't have that 26-yard touchdown, it was a nothing ball game, and he had a costly fumble in the fourth quarter at the Lions. But this week at Kansas City, a team, obviously they've played a lot over the last couple seasons, regular season and playoffs. I think Derrick Henry, he fixes his fumble issues and has a decent game in pretty much a must-win game. You go 1-3, your chances are tough to make the playoffs. Number 10, Bucky Irving of the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. So Bucky last season, 4th-round pick rookie, had a nice breakout season, was the running back by mid-year. This week, a tougher matchup versus Philadelphia, but he's another running back that's one of the better receiving backs in the league, and a lot of short routes at times gets him some of those scammy PPR points. So this week versus Philly, in a potential track meet between these two teams, like Bucky, Irvin is a top 10 option. Number 11, Kyren Williams to the Los Angeles Rams. Kyren, he's been a steady back over the last 3 seasons. We know he's a smaller back, and injuries have been a problem for him over the last 2 years. But so far, he's off to a good start as Kyren Williams. I think a little bit underrated, to be honest, as well. And this week in a pretty decent matchup with Indianapolis coming to town, where they do give up points, even though they're 3-0. They've given up 20 or more points per game. Is this Indianapolis team in 3 games? And when you're on a high-powered offense, with obviously Puka Nacua, Davante Adams, teams aren't going to load the box, and some of those running lanes are going to be open. Number 12, Jordan Mason of the Minnesota Vikings. We saw last season with the Niners. He took over for McCaffrey when he went down with injury early in the season. And Mason put up some big games, and last week we saw it versus a bad Bengal defense. I know it was, but Mason, physical running back in between the tackles. I know not much of a pass catcher out of the backfield, but he don't need to be the way he's been running the football last season and this year so far. And now we see with Aaron Jones out, it's his backfield 100% pretty much is Jordan Mason. And even this week in a tougher matchup versus Steelers defense, I think he goes out there and has another good ball game. 13, Omarion Hampton of the Los Angeles Chargers. First 2 weeks, he barely touched the football, even though he played a majority of the snaps in that backfield for this Charger team where they threw a whole lot. And then last week, we saw Najee Harris, who was starting to even to his work a little bit, tear the Achilles. And now it's fully his backfield, Omarion Hampton. I know they got Vidal, who they drafted last season, Hassan Haskins, but those guys aren't going to see the field really, and they're not going to take touches from Hampton. So after last week, his breakout game in his rookie season, Hampton going over 23 PPR fantasy points and showing receiving prowess out of the backfield this week in a great matchup at the New York Giants. That can't stop anyone. I think Hampton, his ceiling's definitely higher now. Obviously with Harris out of the picture, 14, Chuba Hubbard of the Carolina Panthers. Very underrated running back over the last 2 seasons. He is Chuba Hubbard, but he goes out there, could do it all, 3 down back. I know he's a smaller back as well, is Chuba Hubbard, but obviously that hasn't been an issue for Chuba Hubbard throughout the last couple seasons, and it hasn't been an issue for Carolina. They gave him a contract extension. Last season was this Carolina Panther team, and right now Chuba Hubbard's going out there, and he's a very consistent number 2 RB for fantasy owners. So this week in New England, a Bemba break defense. I still think yards are out there for Hubbard, and like I said, this could be a tightly contested game where these two teams are pretty similar. Number 15, J.K. Dobbins of the Denver Broncos. So Dobbins, 3 weeks to begin the year, 15 or more fantasy points in PPR leagues. R.J. Harvey really hasn't been a factor at all in this backfield. And this week, a good matchup on Monday night versus Cincinnati Bengals. So the thing with Dobbins, it's always been health. It hasn't been a talent thing. We saw last season with the Chargers, played good football, then he went down with injury towards the end of the year. And so far this year, he's playing good. So this week with a good matchup versus Cincinnati and coming off with a good game versus a good Charger defense, he's a nice RB2 for owners as well. 16, Breece Hall of the New York Jets. So this Jet team, I don't know what it is. They just don't fully trust Breece Hall, I think, at times. We know Brandon Allen's getting work for this New York Jet team. Short yardage, goal line back as well. Brandon Allen has been, but Breece Hall, he's a running back in between the tackles. He could get the job done. Catching the football out of the backfield, we've seen him have some 50-plus reception type of seasons. And this week in Miami, we know this defense can't stop anyone. So if it's any week Breece Hall is going to bounce back, it could be this week. 17, Ashton Jeanty of the Vegas Raiders. Ashton Jeanty right now, he's definitely been dropping down the rankings. Coming into the year, a lot of hype after rushing for over 2,000 yards in Boise State last season. But obviously a small school. And now he's here with the Vegas Raiders, and we really haven't seen much. We've definitely seen flashes, running over, obviously, defensive players, but he's just not following his blockers, and this offensive line isn't that good. And the other problem is this Vegas Raider team. When they're down, Jeanty's not really in there, where he's not much of a receiving back yet, where he could obviously develop that as the season goes on and later on in his career. But like I said, right now, Ashton Jeanty, it's not looking great, not following his blockers, but if it's any matchup for him to get going and have a big game, it's this week versus the Bears, where their defense really isn't that good. 18, Alvin Kamara of the New Orleans Saints. And Kamara, he's reaching that point as a running back where things obviously start to tail off and you lose a step. And we've seen great running backs just once they lose it, hitting 30, 31 years old, that's it. We've seen it with Ezekiel Elliott over the last couple seasons. He's not even in the league. David Johnson, we saw him many years ago. Once he got older and got banged up, his best years were behind him. And now Alvin Kamara in a tough matchup this week at Buffalo. And this offense, they just throw the football a whole lot, even though we know Kamara is one of the better PPR running backs in the league. I just think his ceiling just isn't that high as it was last year. 19, Travis Etienne of the Jacksonville Jaguars. So maybe I'm lower on Etienne than other podcasts and consensus. But the thing with Etienne, yes, he's off to a good start, but I think teams are going to start loading that box up, try to stop Etienne and have Trevor Lawrence try to beat him, because we've seen nothing from Brian Thomas Jr. so far this season. And Travis Hunter, he's a part-time offensive player where they're using him on both sides of the ball. So no doubt Etienne's had 3 good games to start the year. But this week in a matchup at San Francisco, even though I know Bosa is out for the season with a torn ACL, I still think it could be a tough matchup. Then you think 20, Jaylen Warren of the Pittsburgh Steelers. Jaylen Warren, he's the man over there. I thought coming into the year, Caleb Johnson was going to eat into his carries, but obviously that hasn't been the case. But obviously Gainwell, he's been the backup, but he vultured a touchdown last week. This week, a tougher matchup versus Minnesota, but Warren with his catching prowess, I think he'll be fine. And you know the Steelers team, they don't want Aaron Rodgers going out there throwing the football 40, 45 times. 21, Chase Brown of the Cincinnati Bengals. Obviously, everyone took a hit on this Bengal team with Joe Burrow out at least till December with the turf toe injury. And last week, Chase Brown, one of the worst lines you'll ever see at the running back position. 10 carries for 3 yards. So Chase Brown dropping down the rankings pretty quickly over the last couple weeks here, where week 1, he had a mediocre game, but it took him 21 carries to get 43 yards in that week at a touchdown. And then last week, like I said, a down game. So this week in a matchup in Denver, I know running backs have gone out there, had monster games versus them all season long, but still Chase Brown, it's not hitting the holes right, and teams are loading the box now and forcing Jake Browning to try to beat him. 22, Kenneth Walker of the Seattle Seahawks. Kenneth Walker, another running back, his yards per carry aren't good, but last week 2 touchdowns obviously saved his day. And also Zach Charbonnet was out last week, where this week it looks like he's going to return, where he's fully participated in practice so far, and it's a Thursday night game in Arizona. So I expect this to be a decently high-scoring game between these two teams. But like I said, it's a 50-50 split, but I'd rather have Walker, where he could at least catch the football out of the backfield, and Charbonnet's a little bit more touchdown dependent. 23, Javonte Williams of the Dallas Cowboys. I think Williams, he might get a little bit more in the passing game as well out of the backfield, with CeeDee Lamb out 2 to 4 weeks with the high ankle sprain. But this week, a very tough matchup versus the Green Bay Packers. In my opinion, the best defense in all pro football, even though last week it was leaky towards the end of that one, where the Cleveland Browns came back and won the game. But this week, it's going to be tough sledding for Williams. And like I said, this Cowboy team, they could be down 2-3 touchdowns pretty early, have to abandon the run. And that's where, obviously, it's not going to be a great thing for Williams, even though, like I said, he's a decent receiver out of the backfield. But still, the ceiling in this one just isn't that high to me. 24, Trey Benson of the Arizona Cardinals. Benson now the man over there in Arizona. James Conner out for the season with the ankle injury, carted off, got surgery immediately. And Benson, coming into the year, they were propping him up, was Arizona. Even James Conner said he's going to have a good season as Benson. And now he's going to be the man with no competition. Amari DiMercato, I don't see him really taking touches or time away from Benson. So this week in his first start of the season versus the Seattle Seahawks, I think on volume alone, he could work his way as a top 24 option. 25, David Montgomery of the Detroit Lions. Rolled up the hit, and rightfully so. When you got a guy like Jahmyr Gibbs, obviously, your attempts are going to go down, where Gibbs could hit a big play every time he touches the football. Montgomery last week, though, hit a few big plays. He had a monster game, no doubt about it. Over 150 yards rushing, found the end zone, including a 73-yard run in that ball game at the Baltimore Ravens, where they gashed him. But this week, it's a tougher matchup versus the Cleveland Browns. And like I said, Montgomery, another running back where he's touchdown dependent, and he's only going to get 12, 15 touches per week. But still, if you need him as a flex or back-end RB2, I think he can help on his 26, Quinshon Judkins of the Cleveland Browns. So Judkins, he's looked pretty impressive the first 2 weeks since he's been playing after he had some off-the-field issues. Was Judkins, and now he's cleared. And then week 2, we got some work, and then last week started and grinded out type of performance. But the thing is, if they're down early and often, which I expect they will be at Detroit, is Cleveland, he's not much yet of a receiver out of the backfield. Obviously, it's early, but also you got guys like Dylan Sampson, and Jerome Ford there as well, even though they barely saw the field in the Week 3 game versus the Green Bay Packers. But Junkins, just the way this game script might go, is why I'm a little lower on him. 27 Cam Scatterbo of the New York Giants. So this Giant team, they're going with a lot of young guys in this one now. Jackson Dart named the starting quarterback. Russell Wilson, 2 out of 3 games, he couldn't do anything. And also Malik Neighbors only in his second year. And now Tyrone Tracy, we saw last week, leave the game with the shoulder injury. And now he's out 2 to 4 weeks with the dislocated shoulder. So Scatterbo showed last week he belongs. Catch the football out of the backfield. Big physical back where he can run you over, and he's looking for contact. And this week, it's a tough matchup, no doubt about it, versus the Los Angeles Chargers, but he don't really have much competition there as well. They got Devin Singletary. We know he's a veteran in this league who had some success, but this Giant team going nowhere this season, already 0-3, and obviously that's signaling what I'm saying with going with Dart at quarterback, where they're going with the kids. I think Scatterbo, he could be a 15-20 touch per back week where he could catch the football out of the backfield. But this week, just a tough matchup, and with a rookie quarterback in there, we'll see how this offense operates. 28 DeAndre Swift of the Chicago Bears. So Swift, his workload hasn't been great. Kyle Monangai is taking some work as well over the last couple weeks. But Swift, I think he fits pretty well in this Ben Johnson offense for the Chicago Bear team. And this week, a good matchup at the Vegas Raiders. But like I said, the only thing is this Bear team throws the football a whole lot, and the ceiling just, to me, isn't that high for DeAndre Swift. I still think he could be a guy, 70, 80 total yards, possibly find the end zone weekly. Is going to be a ceiling for the most part. 29, Tony Pollard of the Tennessee Titans. So Tony Pollard, no competition in the backfield. Tajay Spears, he's still out at least a couple more games, or possibly returning in their next game for Tennessee. And Pollard, he's been a touchdown-dependent running back. Even with 20, 22 touches per game, Tony Pollard, he hasn't really been a receiver out of the backfield, which is a little odd, where he's had some seasons where he's caught 40 to 50 passes under his belt as Pollard. So this week at Houston, grinded out type of game it could be between the two division rivals. And last week, Pollard, he had a grinded out game where he found the end zone. But like I said, even with all the touches he's getting and no competition, if they're trailing early and often, it's just weird. He's not doing much in the receiving game, and he's been a touchdown dependent back so far in the early going. 30, Ja'Cory Krosky-Merritt of the Washington Commanders. Obviously, this is a 3-man committee over there now in Washington. Austin Eckler out for the year, tore the Achilles in week 2 in that game at the Green Bay Packers. And then last week, Jeremy McNichols looked like the best back. We had a Marshawn Lynch type of 60-yard touchdown, running over defenders, breaking tackles, and taking it into the end zone. And Christian Rodriguez was in the mix with 11 touches, out-touching Krosky-Merritt. So Krosky-Merritt, he's not a receiver out of the backfield, but goal line he's going to get, I think, and obviously in between the tackles in early downs, he's going to get Krosky-Merritt. So another guy with a cap ceiling, but this week at Atlanta, I think he could carve out a decent game. 31, Trevion Henderson of the New England Patriots. It's a 3-man committee over there, looks like, in New England. Trevion Henderson, they took him early in the NFL draft, was New England. They know they needed some help and a playmaker in the backfield. And Ramondre Stevenson, I think, could be in the doghouse after last week. He pretty much cost them the game. 2 fumbles, including one of them at the 2-yard line where they were about to run it into the end zone. So I think Henderson, he's going to be the favorite now for touches over in New England. But I'm not totally counting out Stevenson still being a part of this backfield. So this week with a good matchup on paper versus the Carolina Panthers, I still have to see how this backfield shakes out with the touches. 32, Zach Charbonnet of the Seattle Seahawks. Charbonnet, he missed the game last week, and in week 2 he was bottled up with only 15 carries, 10 yards, which obviously is a horrible stat line. So Charbonnet practicing full. Looks like he's ready to go Thursday night at the Arizona Cardinals. But he's another touchdown-dependent back, and he's in a 50-50 split right now, and he don't catch the football out of the backfield. 33, Nick Chubb of the Houston Texans. So Nick Chubb, solid running back, obviously, throughout his career. But now he's at the latter part. You know, he's not that old of a running back in terms of other running backs we've seen in the league, but with these bad knee injuries over the last couple seasons, especially last year, and this Houston Texan offensive line just not that good, and they've been a one-dimensional team so far this season. And Chubb not a receiving back this week, even in a game where they could be leading versus Tennessee Titan team. He's another touchdown-dependent running back, even getting 15, 20 touches per game. And like I said, you're not going to see him in there in passing downs where that's Woody Marks is rolling this offense. 34, Kareem Hunt of the Kansas City Chiefs. I'm not big on Hunt or Pacheco, and especially this week versus the Ravens. I know last week the Ravens got gashed over 200 yards on the ground by Gibbs and David Montgomery. But Kareem Hunt and Isaiah Pacheco aren't in the same league, obviously, as a Jahmyr Gibbs and David Montgomery in terms of putting up numbers and being talented running backs. So Kareem Hunt, I think he's the better back out of the two. He catches the football out of the backfield. And Isaiah Pacheco, he really hasn't been a factor since he had the leg injury last season. He didn't do much towards the end of the year when he came back. And so far this season, he hasn't done much. So a 50-50 split and a tough matchup this week for Hunt. I just think he has a little bit more upside than Pacheco with the receiving. And we saw him vulture the TD last week, 35, Ramondre Stevenson of the New England Patriots. So Ramondre Stevenson last week, like I said early in the video, 2 fumbles, 1 at the 2-yard line where he would have went in. And week 2, we had a big game, over 20 PPR fantasy points versus the Dolphins. And this week on paper, a decent matchup versus the Panthers. But after what I saw last week, like I said, I think he's going to be in the doghouse of Stevenson, and his touches are going to go down. And they might make Henderson the man in this ball game. And the 36th and final back, I'm ranking Isaiah Pacheco with the Kansas City Chiefs. So like I said, I like Kareem Hunt's upside a little bit more. Took the touchdown last week away at the goal line, and Hunt could catch the football out of the backfield, where Pacheco really isn't a receiver out of the backfield, even though he's been working on his route running. And it's a contract year where he wants to go out there, have a good season, and get paid in free agency. But right now, I just don't see it with Pacheco. And like I said, that since that leg injury, he hasn't been the same. And this week versus Baltimore, I don't see much upside. So that's the top 36 running backs I'm ranking for week 4 of the fantasy football season.